Welcome to episode 106 of the Lowdown Radio Show presented by advrider.com. I'm Neil Graham. This week, managing editor Zac Kurylyk and I chew the fat about hitting the road this spring. Zac tells a harrowing tale of an attempt to fix the heated grips on his WR250, and I look heavenly and ask the gods why, oh why, despite having cleaned the carburetors on my Ducati, that it remains a cantankerous cold starter. Then we talk about the ritual of the first spring ride. For me, it always seemed to be a frigid weekend away with a girlfriend. The trips, well, they rarely went well, nor did the relationships. Well, for Zac, it was always a miserable ride in gruesome weather, which reminded me of one of my father's favorite sayings. Why did the man beat his head against the wall? Well, of course, because it felt so good when he stopped. All this in Zac's mindset in anticipating his first ride after a serious crash late last season. Plus some more stuff, too, on this week's Lowdown Radio Show. Zac, it's that time of year again when the snow finally goes and we can think about riding again. What have you got on the go for spring projects? And now, of course, here I am asking you a question and then interjecting. But you're still getting over your injuries. In fact, I don't believe you've ridden since you had your accident last year. So spring projects, and what are you hoping for this year?
Well, I will say this. It's the 15th of April. This is the latest that I have gone, that I haven't ridden. And I couldn't tell you how many years, because normally my goal is to be on the road by the first day of spring, March 21st. And this year I'm about a month behind. So my first
Well, I think your first project is learning how to speak English, but
my
give me your second project.
My second spring project. No, my first spring project is getting myself back on the road. I will say that I think I will have an attempt at that this week. It's pretty crappy, rainy, cold weather, so that doesn't make you super motivated to go out and attempt a return after, months of physiotherapy. But I'm going to try it, I think, this week. I have been doing a bit of tinkering on the WR250 this week, which is the first I've been in the shop since the accident. My heated grips weren't working and a couple of other accessories. So I've been poking and prodding at the electrical system and found the problem. So that's good.
Oh, what was it?
Well,
since you asked.
Well, I wired the heated grips in back in 2019. So I'm at the point now, it's been so long since I've done some of this stuff, I can barely remember what I did. And in this case, I had taken the heated grips and rewired them to a new terminal strip that was energized via my mind's gone blank.
So you rewired your heated grips. You installed your heated grips in 2019.
They were actually came on the bike, but I rewired them for superior performance and safety.
So you fixed a problem that didn't exist.
Yeah, well, kind of. What happened was I put them on a relay. That's the word I was looking for.
Relay. Okay, perfect.
And of course, being a sober-minded, careful individual, did not want to be in Labrador and have my motorcycle fail to start because I left my heated grips on. So I put a relay in to avoid that problem, and then used the license plate lamp for a trigger for the relay, and that light broke, or the wiring for that light broke. And I just didn't realize it because I don't follow myself on the street checking out my license plate. So once I got that fixed, it all fell into place.
So you just had to replace the taillight bulb?
Actually, it was the wiring to the bulb.
Wiring to the bulb. But how do you feel about your physical condition, though? Because I know you were having wrist issues, among other things, I believe.
Yeah, still don't have the movement in my wrist that I need. But, I'll just have to use the old elbow to use the throttle instead. We'll see. We will see.
See, I don't. How's your left hand?
My left hand seems to be working quite well, thankfully, although I'm right-handed, so,
Well, I remember seeing a guy who was a one-armed flat tracker. Now, it's hard enough to be as a two-armed flat tracker. I can tell you that it's no breeze. But there was a really good one-armed flat tracker. So here's what I would think. Having ridden an old Indian um, that had a right-hand throttle without a return spring, and then the left hand had a twist grip as well, which was the Spark Advance that rotated the distributor. I think you should and I don't know why by racers or riders that do this that have injuries don't try this. Just put the throttle on the left. Because I think the controls on a motorcycle are all wrong. You've got 2 feet and 2 hands, if you're blessed with all 4. So why put the 2 most important controls, throttle and front brake, on the same side of the handlebar? When the left hand mostly just waves at Can-Am 3-wheelers, So it seems absurd to me that we waste all this, capability of our left hand. So I think you should consider, before you buy a Can-Am, and please, seek outside advice before you do that. But I don't know why more people don't try that.
Well, my question to you is, which arm was this flat track racer missing? Because if it was the correct arm, think of just how low he could get going sideways. He wouldn't even have to worry about this arm dragging on the ground. He could drag his whole shoulder.
It was I'm fairly sure it was his left that was missing.
That's a performance enhancing advantage.
It is. In fact, I think you'll see a lot of people cutting their arms off just to gain anything for a 10th, right?
Yeah, I look forward to the next trend in racing. After bagger racing, it's going to be amputee racing.
Bagger racing. I think, well, since we're on the topic of bagger racing, I'll make this brief, lest everyone die listening to us. But I think it should be 2-up bagger racing, and I think you should have a minimum blood alcohol level. Like you should actually, you should replicate what happens in real life. So you got the missus on the back, you had a beer, shot, and a martini, and you're coming home. And I just think if you did that, and it would be even better if the 2 riders had to be a couple, because then they could bicker. And because there's a new owner of MotoGP, an American company, and they own Formula One, and so the idea is they want to build these sort of make it more entertainment. So if you to get the casual race fan, just like that Formula One TV series did. So if you had couples bickering and you could have access to their audio mid-race, I don't see how it could fail.
Well, I'll say this. We could combine that with my idea that I had for April Fool's Day of a bobber racing series, right? So every race series now has to have like its 400 entry levels. So we do the bobber series as sort of the entry level thing. Then we could have like a chopper, like a panhead chopper series for the middleweight series. And then the bagger series is the full bore thing, like you say, with the passenger. I think this has got some serious legs on it.
And then and then if you branch out to India, of course, you'd have to embrace local customs, and so you could have actually 4 people on a motorcycle, including a woman in a sari and an infant, which is what I saw when I was in India. So it really is limitless, the possibilities for the bagger racing series. We should trademark some of these ideas. All right. Well, since you didn't ask, I'm going to tell you what I'm doing. I am on my old Ducati 900 SS. I'm concerned that it's become really miserable to start. So last year I took the carburetors off. Carburetors, you know what they are. Took the carburetors off and bought an ultrasonic cleaner and cleaned them. And of course they were immaculately clean. And I took all the jets, like I did everything like you're supposed to do. Took all the jets and everything apart. And once it's warm, it runs beautifully, but it's really difficult to start. And I've sought videos online about people with the same engine, the same carburetors, and they seem to start fine. So I don't know. And it's got aftermarket coils, so it's got a hot spark. So I don't really know what to do next. I don't want the carburetors. I guess I could go into them again, but I should double check my valves, because a valve can hold up. Sometimes it can give you that sort of false reading, but it actually just kind of shows you how difficult it is and how rewarding it is to figure it out, but how difficult it can be to troubleshoot things, because it's usually only clear after you've figured it out. But leading up to that, it's I don't know, it always seems baffling to figure out what's going on.
I know that when it comes to starting a bike, once we moved away from the old reliable standby of your leg, which is still my favorite way to start a motorcycle, um, I think a lot of bikes that won't start well, a lot of it comes down to if you just put a bigger battery on it, it'll actually surprise you how well it cranks over. I know that's the case with my Super Tenere. Um, the Yamaha spec'd a kind of a wimpy battery for it, and if you go up a bit in juice, it runs way better.
Yeah, well, see, I got a new battery a couple years ago, a BS battery, but I didn't get the fancy one. I got the lead acid, so it weighs about 75 pounds. Um, but I still prefer lead acid batteries for the street. I think they're more reliable. In the race bike, of course, I have a lithium, but um, because I'm told that the charging systems for a lot of older bikes do not really suit lithium batteries. At least that's what I've been told. No one can
Yeah.
explain it. No one can dumb it down far enough that I can understand electricity when it comes to charging batteries. In fact, I don't think it's possible. But it's and then I got oversized battery cables, which are about as big around as my finger. So it's not that, because when it's warm, you don't when it's warm, you don't even feel it turn. It's a beautiful thing, Zach. You don't even feel it turning over. You press it and it's running. It goes from off to running. There is no sensation of it cranking.
You know, it probably would start better even when it was cold out. A big single cylinder motorcycle, just like you'll love.
Oh, stop it.
Listen, I have a question for you.
Yeah.
This time of year, I always take my first ride, just around locally to make sure things are running okay on the bike. And then I take my first, proper day trip. And I've got a route that I take up the Kennebecasis River usually. Uh, Beautiful scenery, kind of quiet back roads through farm country. And I would classify it as adventure riding, even though it's all on the street, because you never know when you're going to encounter 3-foot high pile of cow patties left there by some tractor that lost its load. So, it's almost a ritual. I wouldn't say ritual maybe, but it's just a habit that has been a yearly thing. Same sites, same stops, same general route. Is there something like that for you that you do locally, or do you just wait for the racetrack to open?
Well, no, in fact, here's what I did for years. Now, I'm not as hard. I mean, there was a time when I was a young man when I would be out when it was just, slightly above freezing. Mercifully, I got over that. And so now I kind of wait till things are nice. But here's what I do. Here's the classic Neil early season ride. Now, this may not be a first ride, but this is an early season ride. So what I would do when I was younger, for years, like even when I was not so young, I would take a girlfriend. We would go, the forecast would be nice and sunny and, say 60 degrees. And we would go away somewhere. And we'd go down, say, into New England, into the Adirondack Mountains. And I would always fail to allow for the fact that when elevation changes temperature. So on the flat, when it was sunny, it was comfortable. But then you'd get into the mountains and it would be kind of cloudy, and all of a sudden it would be 38 degrees. And this is before, you had proper gear. You just kind of wore whatever you had. The gloves are kind of just this side of gardening gloves. And I would always do this with a girlfriend, and it would go to hell. And I remember once being away in the Norton with a girlfriend. The Kickstarter broke, so we had to park on hills to get it going again. And it was the long weekend in May, and every hotel and motel was booked. And we rode around in the dark and the cold, and it was horrible. It felt like November. That's my quintessential early season ride.
We would typically, the guys I ride with, we typically try to get something in 1st of May, last of April, but it's only, really close to home. But we try to do an overnighter, and then we do a 3-day, 4-day run on the long weekend in May as well. Last year, we went, most of the guys backed out, so we ended up going up to Cape Breton, just me and one other guy. and stayed in a cabin that was built with help from one of the Rankin family. Actually, John Morris Rankin had his name on the wall. Um,
Well-known East Coast musicians, if you're into the Yida Diddly scene.
a lot more than ID Diddly. They did whatever they had to do to make a buck. But they certainly did lots of that.
They did lots of
Um,
that.
I find early season riding in cold, I actually find it very rewarding because at every stop you feel like you've accomplished something, even if you just, rode on a quiet road at a quiet speed. You are out there beating the elements while all the other lesser, less manly or less womanly.
People like
Uh,
me. I'm both less manly and less womanly at the same time.
I always found it's like the Hilary Belloc poem, "Living cheaply is its own reward." Well, motorcycling in the cold is its own reward, but I did find it rewarding.
My father had an explanation for that. He would refer to people who did things like that as banging your head on a wall because it feels so good when you stop.
That's exactly what it is. I will say, some of my best rides and my best memories on a motorcycle have been from those first of the year runs. I remember one that we took when I was in university down east on PEI. And we never went there when we were kids because we didn't know anybody down there and there was no reason to go. But one day, and myself and my cousins, we all got on our bikes and went down east for the day, and we just had a wonderful ride. I just remember how good it was to explore some new place we'd never been to before, and you know, uh, I still have a bunch of photos of that day, and I every once in a while put them up on the wall and think about it, how much fun it was.
I think my best, aside from going out away with a girlfriend and having a horrible weekend, one of my favorite stupid early season rides was I'd in the winter in an unheated shed, I'd rebuilt the transmission on my Commando. And I decided to go out around the block, and I was wearing a snowmobile suit, an old snowmobile suit from when I was a kid. And I had improper gloves on and I just wanted to go around the block to make sure it shifted. And so as I'm stopped at a stoplight, I'm trying to, hear the engine is ticking over and the idle speeds where I want it to be. And a guy pulls up with a straight piped Harley. Of course, and that ends the listening on my behalf, even though Commando is hardly a quiet motorcycle. So I'm getting a little bit pissed off. So I decide I'm going to accelerate sharply away. And it's just, it's 40 Fahrenheit. So as I turn the corner to get away from this guy, I tuck the front. Now I'm in quite a busy intersection. There's a median, 3 lanes, 3 lanes in every direction. So I tuck the front, slide over, the front wheel catches the median, which is only a few feet wide, and catapults me onto the hood of a car going in the opposite direction. A woman sitting in the turn lane to go to a shopping mall. It's in my parents' hometown. Or my hometown. And so immediately, I don't think, am I okay? I just think I have to get out of here because I may have scratched her car and she'll be angry and I'll have to pay and I don't have any money because I just rebuilt my transmission. So you would not believe how quickly you can move when you're really desperate. So I jumped up and hoisted the bike onto its wheels and rode home with a broken shifter, shifting with my hand and dragging my left foot behind. But that's probably my most memorable early season ride. But I think in general, you have to have a lot of enthusiasm when you head out. You have to underestimate how chilly it gets when the sun starts to go down. And then you have to limp home.
So I have never been so cold as I took a tour once from my home in Western Prince Edward Island to Charlottetown, where I was going to university to drop off, I think, a term paper or something. Then I rode from Charlottetown to Fredericton in March on a Kawasaki KZ 440 with no windscreen or anything. And it was cold on the ride. I remember riding along the St. John River, and there was ice flows all through the river when I was riding along it after dark, too. So obviously I had no sense. But I was, the trip there went well, but the trip home, The temperature probably dropped 10 degrees while I was there. And a few days later, I went home, and I remember I just could not warm up afterwards. I was so
Yeah.
cold that spent the whole night just in a state of hypothermia. So I don't do stuff like that anymore, or at least I try my best not to.
Yeah, I remember stopping and jamming tourism brochures from a gas station, roadside stop, into my riding suit. And then, of course, when you get home and you undress, and your partner is there, and you just all of a sudden you look like a thief that been stealing these tourism brochures, because you have 18 of them wedged all along the front of your legs and all across your chest and down your sleeves. And
I suspect that thief was not the word that she used.
no, you're right, it wasn't, and I won't reveal what she said. So I did some riding a week ago. You were kind enough to send me on the Continental tire test for the new TKC 80 Generation 2. And, one of the problems when you live in the cold country like we do, or anyone in the North, irrespective of where you live, if you're in one of the Northeastern or Northwestern states, in the Midwest, is you don't ride for a long time, and then all of a sudden you go to a launch and you have to look like you know what you're doing. And it's never easy to get that up to speed thing. And I find it takes me a little bit longer to get in the mood again, sweetheart. I don't know. And this is one of the things that I've written about before about riding is that we don't do it for months and months, and then all of a sudden we just go out and we go. And most of us don't think about it. We don't start with a short ride, or we're not aware. We're not consciously focusing on what we're doing. We just kind of rip out of the driveway. And I try to change that. So yeah, I mean, to further to your question from before, which is I try to do a shorter first ride, and just kind of be aware that I'm doing something that can end poorly, as you determined yourself last fall. So here's what I'm going to ask you after your accident. You've had all winter to think about it, and you were not doing the kind of stuff I do, which is kind of going too fast often. You were because you're a sensible man by nature. You were just riding along a straight road, and you had this incident with a car that pulled in front of you. So has this affected your outlook to riding this season?
That is a very good question, of which I've posed to myself several times, because it's April 15th today. We are very close to the 10-year anniversary of my good friend Rob Harris, his death in a crash. And when that happened, I worked with Rob for about 6 years before that happened. We were very close friends. And when that happened, people said, "Will this change how you ride?" And I said, "No, I don't think I will. I ride within my limits, always have, always will." And yet, I think in the 10-year sense, it probably has changed how I ride. And on the other hand, that could just be getting older. You have different values for different enjoyments in your life, different thrills. So I don't know if it will change how I ride, or if just in general life will make me slower. Not that I could get much slower. I'm just about ready for a V-Star 650. But
God,
a TW200. No, I really don't know. The short answer is I can't tell until I get out there. I don't think so. I wrote a piece about this for the next issue of the print magazine, which I'm just going to give us a plug here. The next print issue comes out in I think a couple of weeks. Certainly, it will be out by the end of May for sure. And my opening editorial.
And if you become a site supporter for advrider.com, you get the biannual magazine, and I will give you free marital advice.
For what it's worth.
Which is absolutely nothing.
But I did talk about this in the article, and I said, I think as a motorcyclist, there are a few excuses that you have to believe in at some level to keep on motorcycling.
Delusions, more delusions than excuses, wouldn't you say?
Delusions, coping mechanisms, call them what you want. There are some things you have to tell yourself before you, just to go down the road because, as Van Neistat says, the YouTuber who we would like to have on the show,
Yeah, he won't
Van.
return my phone calls.
Oh man, well we'll get Van on here someday.
Oh,
But
God.
Van says,
Does he work for, by the way, does he work for Harley Davidson? Because that would explain why he doesn't respond to me.
no, he works for himself. That's even worse.
Oh,
But
no, it's not.
Van says that motorcycling is the most dangerous thing that an ordinary person does. And I think he's right. And he says, like the dangers, most people don't skydive. I don't know any skydivers. I don't know anybody who, runs with the bulls, but I do know lots of motorcyclists, even if I didn't ride a motorcycle myself.
Mhm.
And I think there are a few things you have to tell yourself. Personally, I've always had a couple that I believed in. Number one is, well, I ride carefully. I ride so that I won't have a crash because I'm super careful. And I am very careful to the point where I've been made fun of at times. I don't
But
really care.
you've been disabused of that notion because you were traveling slowly in a straight line.
Yes, I was.
So you don't have that to fall back on anymore.
That's right. So this is what I'm saying. I'm losing my excuses. And the other
Right.
excuse that
Right.
I think a lot of people have is just that, well, I've been free from a major crash for this long, so it will probably never happen to me. And statistically speaking, that is indeed the case.
Is that so? Can you prove that? What about that? What about
Yes.
that guy in Montana that got hit 7 times by lightning?
No, there's always a guy in Montana, but on the curve, the statistical curve of motorcycling, once you get through the first few years, with it, you're much less likely to suffer a crash until you get to the end of your motorcycling career. A guy in his 30s who's been riding since his teens is an unlikely candidate for a crash, but a guy in his 60s is a more likely candidate for a crash, or obviously a guy in his teens. So, I always looked at motorcycling like I'm on this bell curve. I'm in a pretty sweet spot. I'm in the middle. I'm already careful. And then, my age, shows that I have the age and experience to avoid trouble, but none of that matters if somebody just runs her over. And that's unfortunately more and more the case. I actually also wrote a piece about this on the website very recently about how the roads are just getting more dangerous. It doesn't matter, even if you're in a car, you get run over by a transport truck. The illusion of safety in your car is going to disappear for a lot of people at the rate we're going.
Well, statistics are interesting because, there's not because they look at society, overall. So there's not a 97% chance that you're not going to get cancer. You either, as an individual, you get it or you don't. And I think this is what happens with motorcycle accidents is we sort of convince themselves. And even now I think, well, Zac had a bad accident, but, that's not going to happen to me. Which is what we do because there is this thing that it must be a built-in sort of human coping mechanism where we just think that bad things can't happen to us because, well, we're different. It's like
haven't
those
happened yet.
Well, it's like when you read those, those post-apocalyptic novels, like Cormac McCarthy's The Road, probably the blackest thing I've ever read. Maybe next to Last Exit to Brooklyn, the Herbert Selby book. But it's always from the perspective of the two people who survive the apocalypse. It's like, no, you're going to be dead. Actually, you're not going to be the surviving one. So I think you have to disabuse yourself of this notion. But, it's funny that you say that now that you've had an accident. I always think that the plane that I want to be on is the one that flies after the one that just crashed. But then the more I think about it, I think, well, what if the plane iced? So if I'm in the next plane, maybe it'll ice too.
Well, I will say this. My predecessor at my first motojournalism job was Piero, and he, of course, died in a crash. My first boss at Canada Moto Guide died in a crash. Evans at motorcycle.com, who I worked with occasionally, also died in a crash. And my riding buddy that I've ridden with since college, his father and his father's girlfriend were both killed in a crash about 11, 12 years ago. these were all very experienced people, and for the most part, I don't know every story, but for the most part, it was because of cars that did what they weren't supposed to do, and it did not matter what these riders did. My cousin's father, he was hit in a head-on crash on a straight road, and there was nothing he could do to avoid it. So these are the risks you have to live with, and I think it boils down to this. I think if you want to ride a motorcycle long term, the number one attitude that you have to have is a sort of optimistic fatalism, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
At a certain point, you just have to say it's out of my hands.
Although, it's interesting. You mentioned people who had no say in it, as was your crash last year. There's nothing you could have done. But statistics show that most motorcycle accidents are single vehicle accidents. They are. We think that it's cars out to get us, but truthfully, the numbers show that it's most of us are single vehicle. As was Pierre, as one of the gentlemen you just mentioned. He rode a gold wing into a guardrail. But so that there's conflicting. It's conflicting, isn't it?
The reality is, I think, like I said, you just have to look at it as if it's your time to go.
Yeah,
That's and I think that a lot of motorcyclists, that's what they ultimately think. It doesn't. If I stop riding, I'll get hit by a frozen piece of poo that a 747 flies over my house and lets go out the window or whatever.
The frozen proof in an airplane. Yeah, that was one of those urban legends of which the age is supposed to disabuse us of. But here's how I think of it. It always comes down to me. If you reduce it on this in a pot in the stove to its essential core elements, I would say that life is this, which is, and here's the central conundrum, which is life is short. So do you A, be super careful, or B, embrace the fact that it's short and try to stick in as much living as you can get. So, and they are both contradictory. And I think, if you have to choose the two, rather than be careful and live a long life, because that's no guarantee. You might as well just live all you can. But here's where I hedge my bets. You got to hedge your bets. I won't do stupid shit like skydiving, because I think I'm a motorcyclist. I still race infrequently, but I race. And it's like, you're just asking for trouble. That's why I don't engage in knife throwing.
Yeah, it's a very hard call, and I think every motorcyclist has their own personal answer as to how they get, what keeps them getting into the saddle. I think some people are adrenaline junkies. Some people find satisfaction in control of the machine, whatever, and whatever that is, that motivation has to factor in as has to be a stronger motivation than your fear of things going wrong. And like I said at the start, I didn't think that when Rob died, I didn't think that it would change how I rode. 10 years later, I'm willing to admit that maybe it has. I can't say for sure. It could be other things that have changed how I ride. Maybe I don't ride any differently at all. Or maybe I ride the exact same as I would have otherwise. I'm just 10 years older and wiser.
Well, now that we've talked about all the reasons why one should never ride a motorcycle, or in fact leave the house, we're not going to do that. What is your first ride going to be? What do you, now that we've talked about it, and what, at least tentatively, what are you going to do?
I think I'll take a ride around my local loop here. I have a 50-kilometer loop. That's 35 miles. That combines ocean scenery with some elevation change and some nice corners, a little bit of a wood section. I like riding it. It's relaxing. I know it well. It was paved 2 years ago, so it's in excellent condition. I think that's what I'll hit. That's what I usually ride first thing in the year. Go up to the gas station, get home, see how that all feels. And if it feels great, which I hope it does, who knows? Maybe my second ride will be to the scene of the accident from last year.
Oh, boy. So I suspect there'll be a story out of that one. Well, my first ride is going to be, as it always is, I'm going to go to the village of Creemore, which is just through the hills to the south of me, to the Bank Cafe for a Cubano sandwich, and good coffee. And that's kind of to feel things out. And I'm going to tell myself not to overcook road number 9, which has some really nice curves on it, because it's always in the shade. The road's cool, and it tends not to be cleared of sort of gravel and sand from the winter until late into the season. So I have to calm myself down, go for a Cubano, coffee, and then come home and shiver in the bathtub.
I love your reference to the road sand. This is something that people in southern climates don't have to worry about.
Yeah, just because it's nice out, it doesn't mean that the winter's the detritus from the winter is going to be changed. And of course, they used to salt the bejesus out of roads here in the north.
They still do here.
No, do they still? Well, but a lot of where I am, they've gone to sand, which is not as good as salt, although of course it's much better for the environment. But there can be sand 1.5 inches thick on certain corners or certain wherever there's a steep hill, or so you really, really have to be careful, because you can really get caught out. So, Zach, let's leave it there. Mind the salt, I'll mind the sand, and let's make it through that first ride alive. That's it for this week. Thank you again for listening to the Lowdown Radio Show.